Hi guys, I'd just like to say thanks for your response and comments to the last video. One of the requests that we got was going through the medicines ethics in practice. I said in a previous video that this isn't a resource for the open book anymore. They've taken it away. They say that you should be referencing legislation.gov, which I'll go through in a bit, but the MEP is still a very useful tool to learn about medicines ethics and practice. So this is what it is. It's published by the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. It's available on Amazon. You can get it secondhand for around £15. I had it for my exam and it was really, really useful. So why is it really relevant? The MEP is not an official reference, which I've said. The legislation.gov is better, and you should be accessing the Medicines Act directly. However, the site is horrendous. Look at this. It's basically all legislation within the UK, so it's to do with, you know, plant health, you can see there, and local government, so it's not specific to pharmacy and medicines. So it means that you have to trudge through a lot of stuff to get to what you really want to know, which could be, you know, a legality of a prescription, which is in a subsection A/-B22, you know. So what the MEP presents is a summary resource of what's on the legislation.gov UK. And the things that it actually covers are the core concepts and skills which you need to know when you're a pharmacist, classification of medicines, medicines spelled wrong there, so that's talking about P, GSL and POM, legalities of prescription, wholesale dealing, veterinary medicines, controlled drugs, and professional standards. In this video, we don't have really enough time to go through in depth into each of these core key areas. However, we're going to highlight the key things that you need to know as the basics in law. So the key topics to know for the exam are, so this is a breakdown of the subsets: legal issues, pseudoephedrine and ephedrine. You've got to know how, you know, what restrictions on supply do you have. You've got to know the background behind pseudoephedrine as well, and why it isn't allowed to be sold in mass quantities. OTC, oral emergency contraception. You've got to know about what people that you can give the EHC to. You've got to know it from a clinical perspective as well. 72 hours is the levonorgestrel, the Levanel. And there's also ulipristal acetate, which is for 5 days, but that's still a POM. Paracetamol and aspirin, lots of people die from taking these medicines. You've got to know about what quantities you can give out. You've got to know about codeine and dihydrocodeine. Codeine is still available from pharmacies, but it's an abusable opiate, so you've got to keep that in mind. Cough and cold medicines for children. The law changed around this maybe about 5 years ago, and certain children can't have adult cough remedies like Volcadine, etc. And codeine you can't give to below the age of 18. You've also got to know about the prescription-only medicines, and you're talking about general prescription requirements, fax, dental, forged prescriptions, what to do in those circumstances, prescriptions from the EEA or Switzerland, you know, whether they're legal, whether they can do controlled drugs, labeling or dispensing medicinal products. You've got to know the particulars that need to be on the label. It's quite useful actually, because if you know that off by heart, sometimes in the pharmacies that I work for, there's power cuts, so the computer goes down and I have to hand write the labels. So it's good to know what kind of parameters you need to put on there. Self-prescribed prescriptions, prescriptions for close friends and family, you know, the ethical points in that. If a doctor comes in and is prescribing for their child or prescribing for themselves, you've got to keep in mind, you know, is this appropriate in this circumstance? Shouldn't another objective prescriber get involved and do the assessment and write the necessary prescription? Summary of prescriber types. So we've got a lot of nurses, doctors, pharmacists now prescribing. What can they actually prescribe? And in addition, these are a bit less important, but it's good to know things about waste medicines. When do you classify a medicine as a waste? Requests for chemicals. There's the CHIP laws that you need to know about. Delivery and posting of medicines. This is kind of a new thing with distance selling medicines. It's good to know. Reporting adverse events. Where do you send those to? Do they go to the MHRA? More topical subject is really electronic cigarettes, and is it ethical to be selling them, although they're not a licensed medicine? Protecting children and young people, safe custody, and destruction of controlled drugs. We won't really be going in depth over this, but it's good for you to go and pick up the MEP or suitable reference source and just go over these. So section 1 is dedicated to the introduction, which just talks about blurb about being a pharmacist or a medical professional. Section 2 really goes into the core concepts and skills. The beginning of the MEP sets out the professional standards. Whilst it's important to know these, it's difficult for the GPhC to formulate questions around this, as a lot of circumstances where you use these principles do not often have a black and white answer, which is needed for the examiners to write questions on. One thing that keeps popping up is the CPD cycle. This section details out continual professional development. You need to know each stage off by heart, and you need to know that you, as a pharmacist, you need to do 9 entries per year. In essence, in section 2, if I were to summarize, it's about the assurance of patient safety, and it is the job of the pharmacist to be as accurate and ethical as humanly possible. So errors do occur. However, you've got to know how to deal with them, how to report with them, and how to evaluate, reflect, and assess them. So section 3 gets down to the nitty-gritty, and they're really, really factual sections, and the GPhC registration assessment exam loves to ask these. So you've got to know the different categories of the medicines. Here it's set out as GSL, P, and POM, which we'll go through individually now. So GSL stands for General Sales List medicines, and are those that can be sold in registered pharmacies, but also in other retail outlets. It's interesting to think, if you've ever been into a petrol station and look to the back of where the counter is, and they usually sell things like aspirin and paracetamol. And from my pharmacist perspective, I know that aspirin shouldn't be given to children because of Ray's syndrome. So does that mean, is the filling station attendant, is that person suitably qualified to be able to make that decision? Well, the government has said yes, because they're on the GSL medicines. You can sell this stuff anywhere. It's mainly due to the marketing authorization, and a lot of herbal remedies are on there as well. If you want a full list of what medicines are GSL, just type MHRA website into Google and you'll find a complete list. P medicines are medicines that can be only sold from registered pharmacy premises by a pharmacist or a person acting under the supervision of a pharmacist. That's like a counter assistant. The counter assistant can't sell P medicines if the pharmacist is not on the premises. Together with GSL medicines, P medicines are collectively known as OTC, so over the counter, or non-prescription medicines. The sale of some of these medicines is associated with additional legal and professional considerations. A good example here is Nurofen Plus. Nurofen Plus contains ibuprofen, which is a GSL medicine. However, in addition, it contains codeine, which is possibly an addictive opiate. So if you go back to the gas station analogy, would that person be able to spot whether a patient is abusing codeine and shouldn't be given more and more and more? The government has said that the pharmacist has a set of skills which enable them to make that assessment, and therefore Nurofen Plus and other kind of codeine medicines should only be sold from a pharmacy. And lastly, you've got prescription-only medicines. To give these out, you need a legally valid prescription. These can be created by a doctor, dentist, supplementary prescriber, nurse independent prescriber, pharmacist independent prescriber, and they can give out everything as long as it's within their own competence. You've got to know that EEA and Swiss doctors and dentists can do medicines, all POMs apart from controlled drugs. Community practitioner nurses, they have a selection of POMs which they can give out, and that's detailed out on the tariff, and there is a bit in the BNF about it. Optometrists, independent prescribers cannot do controlled drugs or parenteral medicines. So in addition to all of this, you need to know about pseudoephedrine. So I don't know if anyone's watched Breaking Bad, but it's basically about a chemist and a chap, and they go around the country picking up pseudoephedrine from pharmacies and converting it into methamphetamine. So there is a big abuse potential. I think it started out in Australia in the early noughties, and it meant that there was a development of restriction of quantity, and for pseudoephedrine you can't give out more than 720 milligrams, which is 0.72 of a gram, and ephedrine no more than 180 milligrams, and you cannot sell both at the same time without a prescription. From a practical sense, you've got to think that things like Lemsip have phenylephrine in, which isn't really included in this, so you could sell that. However, things like Sinutab have pseudoephedrine, so you've got to keep an eye out and don't sell more than 720. This is the restriction on paracetamol and aspirin, and the reason for this is that there's a overdose potential. Not more than 100 non-effervescent tablets or capsules may be sold to a person at any one time. Since most packs are 16 or 32, this means in practice less than 100 non-effervescents can be sold, so it's more like a multiple of 32, which is going to be about 96. However, the effervescents, there's no limits on the quantity. You have to use your professional judgment on that. And with aspirin, you've got to keep in mind that you can only sell it to adults, and there's no legal limits of quantity of effervescent, but the tablets themselves are limited. Cough medicines for kids, there's a limited cough remedy formula for children. It really consists of like honey and lemon and simple linctus, and the reason is the clinical data came out and it just said, look, there's more harm than good these medicines are causing. I think there's an increase in asthma in patients, in children who regularly use cough medicines. Codeine cannot be given to less than 18 years of age. I tend not to give out codeine whatsoever, as there is a counterpart called Folcodine, which is in things like Benylin, and it has a less addictive potential. And to be honest, out of all of this, cough remedies don't work, even for adults. You got to think antitussives, Folcodine, the basis of that is opiate respiratory depression. However, it's so mild and the clinical evidence is so sparse, it's ridiculous. So really, when patients come into me, I say drink a lot of water, which helps move the phlegm and helps them cough a bit more, and honey and lemon drinks, which coats the back of the throat and is kind of like a demulcent. So that's medicine legislation, but the big part in section 3 is prescription legality. You'll almost definitely get a question on this in the exam, and you're most likely to see a picture of an FB10 like so. You've got to keep in mind that 1, prescriber signature, 2, prescriber address, 3, date, 4, the prescriber particulars, 5, the patient's name, 6, the patient's address, and 7, the patient's age are all legal requirements. The age is only really required if they're below the age of 12. But if you receive a prescription, one of those fields is missing, you've got to think to yourself, aha, is this legal or not? So 5 golden rules of prescription validity for FB10s. 1, a normal prescription is 6 months. So if you have a Tenlol, bendroflumethiside, things like that on a prescription, it's good for 6 months. Keep in mind as well, if you're doing a Owings for a medicine, the date isn't from the date the Owings was created, it's from the date on the prescription. Schedule 2, 3, and 4s are only 28 days. Schedules 4 and 5 CDs are repeatable, however 2 and 3 are not. CDs should be recorded on the day of dispensing. You shouldn't leave it till the next day and the inspector comes in and finds you out. And also the counterpart to the MD, the methadone prescriptions, the blue ones, The right hand side is actually a legal requirement. A fax prescription is not legally valid, although probably in practice you've just been dispensing off them. You need to get a prescription, and forged prescriptions should go to the counter fraud services. Interesting, if you find one in your pre-registration, you can actually claim a reward for that, which I think is around about £100. So that's section 3, and it also goes over emergency supplies, which is super important. It can be initiated from either a prescriber or a patient. Prescribers such as doctors, dentists, and the list kind of goes on. They can do emergency supplies, but there needs to be certain conditions in which these are done. There has to be a proven emergency, so it has to be, you know, life-threatening. It has to be now. The prescription is needed in 72 hours. The directions need to be specified. You can't do controlled drugs like morphine, but you can do phenobarbital because it's an epileptic medicine, and records need to be kept in the emergency supply book. So when would you see a prescriber emergency supply? Well, in my practice, it's usually someone calling up on the phone saying, look, I need this done now. I'll send you a prescription, but can you give it to this patient because they've forgotten something? I'll often find out whether it's clinically appropriate, look in the patient's records, and then deem them hopefully able to have an emergency supply. So the other one is when the patient comes in and requests the medicine without a prescription. Firstly, the pharmacist must interview the patient, and this really must be face-to-face. They can't really call up. They should be coming into the pharmacy. There needs to be a proven emergency and immediate need. They have to be able to show they've had previous treatment, like a copy of a prescription or on your PMR record. You've got to know the dose. Again, non-CD, apart from phenobarbital, you can't give more than 30 days. You've got to keep a record kept, and you've got to label emergency supply on the actual medicine itself. Okay, so those are the kind of main, most important parts of the MEP. There's a lot more you need to know. As I said, you should probably go up to Amazon, buy a copy, read through it, note it as much as possible. There's only so much we can really show in this video. So as always, if you want any more resources, please just comment at the bottom and we'll endeavour to create videos for you for the upcoming exam. Visit pharmacycpa.com for the full video series. As always, for more information, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our free PCPA course, join our Facebook group, or subscribe to our blog.